we're looking at the 40 Hadith collection of Imam Nawawi, rahimahullah. And so the 10th Hadith is what we're going to be moving into for this week. So if people want to pull it up, if we can get somebody to read the Arabic, you can read the English. Either or is fine also. If you can't do both, you can read one or the other. Did she have her hand raised?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, go for it. Sorry, there's a table between.
Allah the Almighty is good and accepts only that which is good. Allah has commanded the faithful to do that which He commanded the messengers. And the Almighty has said, O ye messengers, eat of the good things and do right. And Allah the Almighty has said, O ye who believe, eat of the good things wherewith we have provided you. Then He mentioned the case of a man who, having journeyed far, is disheveled and dusty, and spreads out his hands to the sky, saying, O Lord, while his food is unlawful, his drink unlawful, his clothing unlawful, and he is nourished unlawfully. So how can he be good?
Great, Jazakallah khair. Does anyone want to read the Arabic? Hadith number 10. Yeah, go for it. It's okay. Yeah, slow is great.
عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إن الله طيب لا يقبل إلا طيبا وإن الله أمر المؤمنين بما أمر به المرسلين فقال تعالى يا أيها الرسل كلوا من الطيبات وأعملوا صالحا وقال تعالى يا أيها الذين آمنوا كلوا من طيبات ما رزقناكم ثم ذكر الرجل يطيل السفر أشعث أخبر يمد يديه إلى السماء يا رب ومطعمه حرام ومشربه حرام وملابسه حرام وغذي بالحرام فأنا يستجاب له رواه
مسلم. So this hadith is narrated by Abu Hurairah radiallahu anh, who narrated the last hadith that we looked at, hadith number 9. And so we won't go into too much detail on his biography. We talked about him a lot. He's one of the most prolific narrators, transmitters of hadith. And we can look back to some of the recordings for some information on him. To get into the crux of the hadith, kind of looking at it phase by phase. In the first part of this hadith, the Prophet ﷺ, he's saying, Inna Allah tayyib, la yaqbal illa tayyib. That indeed Allah is tayyib, and He does not accept except that which is tayyib. Abu Hurairah radiallahu anh, we remember kind of the point in which he enters into the Muslim community is not necessarily within the early groupings of people, but kind of towards the end of the Prophet's period of prophethood, towards the latter part of the Prophet's life. And here, where you now have a narration that is giving indication into a lot of different frames, but this first part is something that has continuity in a lot of what Islam fundamentally is seeking to inculcate within its practitioner. It's an understanding of who Allah is. Like, who is our creator? Who is our God? And how do we, as best as we can, begin to fathom in our limited capacity a connection to that divine being? The narration isn't talking to us about Allah being al-Khaliq, the creator. It's not introducing to us who we know Allah to be from verses we recite regularly, that He is our Rabb, right? Rabb al-Alameen, Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim. We hear these things again and again. Maliki Yawmiddin. But the notion here is very particular. In Allah Ta'ala Tayyib, in Allah Tayyib, that indeed Allah is Tayyib. Allah is pure, Allah is wholesome, Allah is good. We can translate it in a lot of different ways. And we'll talk about the nuance of the meaning in a little bit. But then it gets juxtaposed to the second part of the first statement, La yaqbal, that He does not accept, illa, except that which is tayyib, that which is pure. An essential understanding of this religion is rooted in the idea that morality is not relative, that goodness in and of itself is not determined purely by what I think, what I feel, what I want, but there's also not ambiguity to it. There's indications of certain things that are just purely understood to be good. Amongst them, for example, the Quran is good, right? It's a text that's very conscious of itself. It tells you that it's a book, and it describes itself as shifa, as healing, as a mercy, a rahmah, as a guidance. The Prophet ﷺ we know is good, right? And so you have this idea of trying to embody the prophetic sunnah as a mechanism of now also being good. And then within that, we also have foundational understanding that God is good. So in whatever capacity an individual is able to embody the characteristics of the divine, we know that the embodiment of those things would also be good. Does that make sense? So Allah is Rahman. Allah is the most merciful, the most compassionate. So if Allah is Rahman and He is the most merciful, the most compassionate, and Allah is good, and you want to be good, then by extension, you want to then be merciful and compassionate. Because if God is good and being merciful then is good, then be merciful. Does it make sense? So they're getting a theological understanding of who Allah is. In Allah Tayyib. Allah is pure. Allah is good. There's a lot of different ways we can define this term tayyib. One of the ways that you want to think about it is if you have some kind of product in front of you, right? A commodity, not to anthropomorphize the divine, but think about something that you can purchase that exists in different gradations of goodness. Like right now, people are buying a lot of watermelons. You might be buying mangoes, right? No? Yeah. Anything that you go that's not necessarily processed, Like there's some foods. My daughter, she said to me in her school, it's not exaggeration, somebody left a box of chicken nuggets from McDonald's at the beginning of the semester. And at the end of the semester, it was still sitting there and it looked exactly the same, right? It's not a good thing. And we're going to talk about some of this in the coming weeks because this hadith unpacks a lot of different stuff. Not just thinking about tayyib in the form of permissibility or impermissibility, because permissibility is halal, it's a legal categorization. Tayyib is a quality, it's a qualitative understanding of something, right? Those chicken nuggets, they're not tayyib, right? If something can exist like that, unrefrigerated, not frozen, it doesn't change in any capacity. They've injected it with all kinds of mess. Do you know what I mean? But you buy things every day that they ripen, they are fresh, they can go bad. So when that thing is at its best state, its most ideal state, that is one way of understanding something that's tayyib. Do you know what I mean? The best kind of qualification that it can be at. When is that thing the most ideal at whatever state of perfection that it can be? Does that make sense? And these words like have ambiguity, not because we don't have familiarity with them, but we don't learn their meanings the same way as we learn other things. And so you know the meaning of things by the names of things, right? We know hadith because hadith has a definition, right? We're looking at a book of hadith. When we say the word sunnah, we might have an understanding of what that means concretely, technically. Just like if I said iPad, everybody in the room knows what an iPad is. We don't have to deepen in a verbose definition of the word. Categorically, everyone knows what an iPad is, just like everybody knows what an iPhone is, just like everyone knows ceiling or floor. But if I say to you words like love or forgiveness or mercy or compassion or good, they have an ambiguity to them. They don't have the same that if I asked all of you to write down on a sheet of paper, what does the word wholesome mean? What does the word pure mean? What does tayyib mean? We wouldn't have a common definition. The way if I told everybody, point to the iPad, everybody knows what it is. It doesn't mean that that's a bad thing to know, but we have ambiguity on things that are necessary variables for the increase in our relationship to our own selves and in turn to the divine. The Prophet is giving them language to understand who God is, to give an essential understanding of who Allah is. Inna Allah tayyib. Allah is tayyib. La yaqbal, He does not accept, illa, except a tayyib, that which is tayyib, that which is also good, pure, wholesome, clean. Before we delve into that deeply, this is an aspect of learning our tradition that becomes imperative because as a religion, it's not just something that's do's and don'ts. You have ritual, you have practice, prayers, fasting, charity. You have theology, you have belief, God, angels, books, messengers, there's creed that's there. But you also have what we understand as another aspect. We talked about all of these when we talked about the second hadith in this text, Hadith Jibra'il. The third prism is ihsan. So you have something to do, you have something to believe in, Islam and Iman, but you have ihsan, something to embody. And then that hadith also asks about the last day, and our religion gives us something to get ready for, right? May Allah make us people who ready ourselves for the day of judgment. So here you have a base understanding of how you can access the divine, but also an opportunity to say, how do I embody these things that I know to be good? There's a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ says, تَخَلَّقُوا بِأَخْلَاقِ اللَّهِ, that embody the characteristics of the divine. So when you're seeking to inculcate and implement characteristics, the point that we started with, that you want to be good, not by standards of what is normatively acceptable, right? In certain industries, you advance because you're willing to compromise on ethics. I'm okay firing 1,000 people so I can retain a bonus structure that is a percentage of what those who are above me are still making, but them retaining their money at the expense of all of these people being miserable. I'm good with that. They hired me to be the guy to fire those persons. I'm willing to do that so I get paid. Where's the rahmah in this? Right? تَخَلُّقُوا بِأَخْلَاقِ اللَّهِ, you embody the characteristics of the divine. That embodiment is something that is not then relative. You have access to these things. Allah is Al-Wadud. Allah is Al-Latif. There's certain things you can't be that in a human capacity it's not. You can't be Al-Khaliq. That's not possible, right? You can't. Allah is Al-Hakim, the source of all wisdom, but you can be wise, and you can be wise by not being foolish, right? So you know what certain things are by knowing what they are not. Allah is Al-Alim. You cannot be the all-knowing, but knowledge can be something that you still have a recognition of its importance, right? It's like in the Sirah class when we're talking about Abyssinia and the Hijra, we say that one of the things we derive from the Prophet sending his companions to East Africa is that he is an informed human being. He knows what the rest of the world is like. He's aware of populations distinct from him. Mecca is in the middle of nothing, but the Prophet knows that there is a sanctuary that is ruled by a just black Christian king. How does he know this? Because he has information, he's informed. The opportunity to embody these things creates for us different entry points. In Allah, tayyib, la yaqbal illa tayyib, gives you an opportunity to know who it is you're calling upon and how it is that you start to embody some of these things. The way that we have an entry point to knowing how we inform our behaviors through ethics and values starts by understanding, firstly, well, what's informing my behaviors to begin with? Like, why do I do what I do? Do I wake up in the morning and say, God is good, I'm going to try to be good, based off of what I know I can access of qualities in a human form through an understanding of what I know of Allah's names and sifat? The Prophet is good. So not in a rigid way that weaponizes religion to say, why are you not X, Y, or Z? But he is a man who we are taught is sent as a mercy to the worlds. إِنَّمَا بُعِثْتُ لِيُتَمِّمَ مَكَارِمَ الْأَخْلَاقِ, that I was sent to only perfect good conduct, ethical behavior, right? So the prayers that you pray in this room, they're supposed to be transformative, and a metric to know if your prayer is doing anything for you. Are you a jerk or are you kind? Do you gossip or do you speak truth and only speak when it's important to speak, right? And this hadith is important to understand because it's going to tell you there's certain things that can block the impact of what your dua can achieve. And you have open, objective conversations because Allah is accepting that which is tayyib. Do you see? The starting point is to be able to think, well, how do I start to buy into this? That I start to bring wholesomeness into what I have. Because the end of the hadith is saying, the man comes, and we'll talk about it more, but he's a traveler. The hadith tells us the dua of a traveler is accepted. He's calling, Ya Rabbi, Ya Rabbi. All these du'as in the Quran, رَبَّنَا آتِنَا فِي الدُّنْيَا حَسَنًا رَبَّنَا هَبْ لَنَا مِنْ أَزْوَاجِنَا, right? All of these du'as starting, Rabbi, Rabbana. The pious are the ones that make du'as, Rabbana. His hands are in the skies, the hadith says. The Prophet, when he made dua for rain, he would raise his hands so high, you could see the whites of his armpits, they would say, right? When you're really into dua, you're raising your hands, beseeching your God as a Rabb and recognizing your Abd, meaning he's got every characteristic outwardly and is being juxtaposed, but his food is haram and his drink is haram and his clothes are haram. How can your clothes be haram? Somebody had to die to make your shirt. A sweatshop had to exist in order for you to buy that brand name. Animals are being mistreated so that you can consume on a mass level. This is not tayyib. This is not like pure or wholesome, right? And if you bring it back to the self, it is posing the question. The Prophet doesn't say definitively the dua is not accepted, because if he said it's not accepted, then 100% it wouldn't be accepted. But he's saying, how can it be accepted? The majesty of Ar-Rahman is that he still hears everything and accepts every dua, but it's giving us an insight embedded in the hadith, connection points, that what you choose to embody is going to impact now the attentiveness of your inner self. And if you're fueling yourself with that which is impure, that which is not tayyib, then the heart is not going to be as solid as if it's being fueled with that which is tayyib. You want to follow prophetic counsel. He's teaching his people, this is who God is. Don't be like the ones that exemplify societally what is good because they dress a certain way or have a certain amount of wealth or a certain house or prestige. But inna Allah tayyib. Allah is pure. He is free of any flaws or deficiencies. Good in this truest sense of what is good. La yaqbal. He does not accept illa tayyib, except that which is good, clean, and pure. Takhallaqu bi akhlaqillah. You want to embody the characteristics of the divine. In order to shift to that perspective, I got to first know what gets in the way. So what I'd like for you to do is to turn to the persons next to you. How do you learn how to engage with people around you? What is it that defines for you, like what you are embodying in your day to day, right? Like we've said it before, you go to a bookstore, they have a lot of self-help books and self-discovery books. There's not a book section that tells you how you treat others. Takhallaqu bi akhlaqillah as a basis to how I live and I exist. I can still go be any profession, but I'm going to be in a state where I try to embody rahmah. I'm going to try to embody like forgiveness, compassion, mercy, love, gentleness, kindness, all these kinds of things. But I can't shift if I don't know why I'm doing what I'm doing right now. Based off of whose standards? Based off of what philosophy on life? Based off of what system of ethics? So if you can turn to the persons next to you and just think this out a little bit. What influences our behaviors? Like, why do I engage in the ways that I engage in? Does the question make sense? You can think about it in terms of what gets in the way, because in order for us to get to this, right? Because then there's benefit to the self and benefit to others. Takhallaqu bi akhlaqillah, that you embody the characteristics of the divine, you embody the characteristics of the Quran, you embody the characteristics of the Prophet of Allah, you embody the messenger of this book. These are things that are unequivocally good. So if I want to be good, I want to be like these things. Why am I not like these things? What are the variables and factors that get in the way that I haven't learned Islam through this prism, or other things trump the trajectory of how it is that I'm choosing to embody? Like what I embody, like somebody was to put a character variable to me and take my name away, what would my name be? Would I be greed or would I be generosity? Do you know? Would I be lust or would I be selflessness, right? Like what would make me, but not in a self-deprecating way. Like why? Why do I embody what I embody right now? What is it that's influencing those things? If you turn to the persons next to you, and you don't have to speak in I statements, but broader, like what's influencing us, so we can start to think what it is that's impacting that part of what is basically the majority of our day, like how I treat everybody around me. Do you know what I mean? What influences that? and then we'll come back and discuss. If you don't know the names of the persons next to you, share those. Like, what influences our behaviors, our etiquettes, what we are embodying? How do we get to where we are right now? And then we'll come and talk it out a bit. But go ahead. Okay, so what are some of the things we're discussing? Like this deen gives us something to embody, and what it's giving us is opportunities to exemplify the embodiment of essentially what's good. Why do I embody like what I embody? What is it that brings me and influences me to engage in the behaviors, the etiquettes that I do at this juncture? So what do we discuss? What do we talk about? Yeah.
Gary and I discussed that in ways it's treating it in a very cyclical way. How someone treats you evidently determines how you treat other people, especially like how you're raised. If you go deeper, it's like usually like you respond to your environment, you respond to how other people treat you and how they influence you.
Also, like I feel like I follow the golden rule: treat those how you want to be treated. Although sometimes it's hard to treat everyone kindly, especially if they're being rude or disrespectful to you. But that just shows your character and keep going. So fortunately, I was raised on love and survival, so I kind of got both sides of it. But yeah, just try to be a better person day by day and treat everyone, whether you're my boss, CEO, or homeless person, because at the end of the day, we're all human. So I feel like I'm not gonna try to kick someone down if they're really low. And I know we all human. Sometimes we spaz out, say things, or be mean to situations. But that's just you gotta notice that about yourself and fix that.
Yeah. And this is a great starting point. Don't forget what you discussed. But does Allah treat you in the ways that he treats you based off of how you treat him the way you treat him? Right? And think about it, not in a way that's like clever or platitudinal, but everything that we know of God, right? And this is why you want to know theology to influence faith. Faith is different from creed. You can rotely memorize creed, but that's not iman, right? Aqidah is creed. Iman is faith. Like you believe in the creed, that's faith. But if you can spit out creed, doesn't mean you buy into it, right? Eternality is like a understanding that applies to everything we know of the divine. Allah is not al-Khaliq, the creator, because he created something. If he never created something, he would still be al-Khaliq. Does that make sense? Every divine attribute that we are taught of has eternal beginninglessness to it. The capacity to fathom something that always just is might be something that we have to kind of sit with a little bit. But what we know of God is that he is who he is because of who he is, not because of who we are. So Allah is al-Wudud, the source of love, the giver of love. And if anyone asks you, how do you know God loves you? Because he tells us he is al-Wudud. And he loves not because of who you are, but because of who he is. Right? He is Kareem. He's the most generous. He gives to you even when you don't give anything to God. Right? Hadith like this give us a lot of different things that we can extrapolate from it, but it also tells us like things that we don't want to just think about at the surface level. Allah knows who he is, Azza wa Jal, and through his book, through his messenger, he's giving us an insight on who he is so we can know him better. But takhallaqu bi akhlaqillah, you want to embody the characteristics of the divine. And one of the things we know of God is that he engages his creation based off of who he is, not who his creation is. You treat people based off of who you want to be, not who they are. We engage people based off of who we are. I treat you based off of who I want to be, not based off of who you are. Does that make sense? And it's a really important thing to be able to understand, right? Because if we have time, we'll talk about it. Because we want to then think about, how do I shift to wanting to be like this? How do I want to be merciful and compassionate? How do I want to be someone who is kind and generous, right? How do I want to have like a wholesome life? Not wholesome like in the way people say wholesome today, right? It's like, oh, that's so wholesome, meaning like that's so cute, or something like this. But like wholesome in the sense that I'm not putting filth in my body. The opposite of tayyib is what is impure. Like what is just filth. It's not good for you. Do you know what I mean? Especially with the consistency that people consume garbage, right? And this is, the man comes. He's a traveler. He is making the dua of the pious. He's calling Allah Rabb. His hands are in the sky, but his clothes are haram. His food is haram. His drink is haram, right? It doesn't balance out. Like, you got to think about it as an entire system. Do you see? What else gets in the way? What else did we discuss? Yeah.
We talked about like the perceived status of like who you are in relation to others, and how like if you like it should be your perception of your status in relation to Allah, but what comes in the way is we switch to our perception and relationship in relation to like other people. So
why do we do that? Like when you're mean to someone, right? I know none of you are ever mean to anybody. Do you know? Or when you lie, or you gossip, you do something that you know is going to hurt somebody else. Why? What's informing your ethics at that time? What's informing your values, right? This religion is not just about do's and don'ts and rights and wrongs in terms of mechanics. It's a part of it, but it's supposed to bring you to something. If it's not bringing you to a place where it enhances ethical conduct, then the Prophet's hadith is not being implemented, right? إِنَّمَا بُعِثْتُ لِيُتَمِّمَ مَكَارِمَ الْأَخْلَاقِ. So why do I change? Because it's not that ethics are absolute. They can be situational. So the way I talk to my 8-year-old is not the way I talk to his 80-year-old grandfather, right? They're different. There's a different mechanism that's there of engagement. What else gets in the way? What else did we discuss? It's important to understand and reflect upon, because why I do what I do is not always a product of like conscious exerted thoughts, right? But even our unconscious development plays a role in how we justify and validate certain behaviors, do you know? And there's a world out there that's like, I just want to be good, but I don't know what that means. And then all kinds of people make millions of dollars selling people on ideas that they're giving them platitudes. Our religion is rooted in reality. So what is it telling you? And the Prophet is the last prophet, meaning he's for all of humanity. The book is for all of humanity. So the ethics have to be universal, meaning every one of you, regardless of where you come from in the world, or how much money you have or don't have, or how old you are or young you are, or whatever else that makes you different, this religion has a universal set of ethics to it. It has to, because it claims to be for all of humanity and all of mankind. It gives you the capacity to have information on how to embody that sense of ethics. It's not that I don't want to do it sometimes, maybe I don't, but what else is informing my decisions in that regard then? My behaviors. Do you know what I mean? Yeah.
We talked about the importance of having good friends. Peer pressure is a real thing. Sometimes you, even though you fundamentally disagree with a particular act, you end up doing that because you're peer pressured into it, which is what having good friends sort of ensures that you're not sort of peer pressured into those acts.
Yeah, and then by extension, the majority of the time you spend, like at least if you were spending time with friends who are idiots, they're still friends, right? Most of us spend time in spaces with people who don't care about us at all. Workplaces where you have to hide your identity, like, or you work remotely and you're not even around human beings for most of the day. It's just a laptop like in your lap. Do you know what I mean? You don't need people's permission to take on their characteristics, just like no one needs your permission to take on your characteristics. And the more you situate yourself in spaces that the presence of the divine is not in, how can you embody the characteristics of the divine when the majority of the spaces you frequent do not have the characteristics of the divine present? When somebody met the prophet of God, it was hard for them to not only doubt the existence of God, but to doubt the idea that that God was a God of mercy. He served to be a messenger of that God, so he embodies in human form every quality of the divine that can exist on a human level to its capacity, and not just the ones that we're talking about, right? Mercy, compassion, right? Allah is al-muntaqim. Allah is the avenger. Do you know? The Prophet stands up for the oppressed. He doesn't leave any room for doubt. He gets angry at haram things when they are categorically racist, abusive, or oppressive. He walks with people through their struggles with compassion when the haram they engage in are not creating those systemic, structural, or individual oppressions. Somebody's struggling with drinking, somebody's struggling with zina. He still has compassion with them. Do you see what I mean? It's not that he's absent of compassion in those moments, but he's embodying all of the divine characteristics. The Prophet stands up for the weak in the face of those who are privileged and in positions of power. Do you see what I'm saying, right? You got to start to think about what it is that influences why you do what you do. And the religion doesn't just offer to us practice, but it gives to us consistently a base of who it is that our Creator is. That doesn't then require things that exist in any type of like physical animate form, because we have a negative knowledge of the divine in our theology, not a pessimistically negative, but we know who Allah is by knowing who he is not. Where the Quran says, "Laysa kamithlihi shay," there's not anything that's like a likeness to the divine. So when you think about what real goodness is, what real perfection is, what the absence of impurity and the presence of purity is, you can't even fathom like Allah's mercy and love. It's so immense. Some of the ways that we start to think about this, though, is on like what we engage in a day-to-day level. So you want to know who Allah is and what compassion is and mercy is, to the utmost of what that might be. You walk through the world and you look for signs of some of these things. Like, when have you experienced compassion or mercy in front of you, like real rahmah? And rahmah is not just mercy. It's important to understand, right? Because we become subservient to language. Even if we don't know what words mean, if a lot of us thought about what mercy was and wrote a definition, in an anti-Black society, mercy is equated to, I went through the red light, the officer pulled me over, I said, don't give me the ticket, I did something wrong, and he said, I'll let you go this time. That's merciful. Rahmah has an element of love to it. It has an element of softness to it, an element of compassion to it, in addition to an element of mercy. The cop doesn't have love for you the way God has love for you. So you can't equate that to be mercy. And in an equitist like justice system, you have to know what the words mean, right? And then you think, like, where do I see it? Where is it embodied? How do I implement it and interject it by having a tangible understanding of what the thing actually is? Do you know? And so all around you, like you can know, right? Like how many things do you experience on a daily basis that are not pure? The clothing lines that you see, like laden on Fifth Avenue, store after store that has all kinds of stuff, you know? Diamonds that people buy. You know how many people have to be killed for somebody to wear a diamond? It's crazy. How many people have to be like die for that diamond? Do you know what I mean? And we're not even talking about food. You can go and look at food in stores. Go to stores and read the ingredients of what you're putting into your bodies. How do chicken nuggets sit on the shelf of my daughter's school for 4 months and they look the same as the day that they bought them? There's not like natural things in these things. There's not. Well, we get to those places, like we'll look at it, but there's no absence of things that can give you an indication of like this apple, like that's organic, it looks really different from this apple that has been injected with all kinds of stuff. This chicken that has no GMOs, this cow that was fed like not just like soy and corn, everything has corn in it. Even things that don't make sense have corn in it because they've learned how to manipulate corn into things that adulterate it, right? You don't want to think about purity in antiquated ways that are simply rooted in things around like physical intimacy or one's like state of engagement with sexual experience. That's not what purity is rooted in our tradition as like a entire understanding. There's so much more that goes into it. Do you know? And so you can just go into any store and you can find things that are adulterated. They're not unadulterated. They've been made to be other than the way that they were intended to be. The chicken that you eat, the cows that we eat, all this kind of stuff. I know, I used to own a butchery that we purposely made organic and fresh and know the cows, the farms they were bought from, because they were treating these things like garbage and mass producing them in ways that there's chickens that are huge, but only certain parts of their bodies are huge because people want to pump them with steroids and then you eat this thing. Do you see? The key part to this is not just knowing, but like reflection, contemplation, letting yourself find a place to breathe and say, okay, in Allah tayyib, Allah is tayyib. Am I tayyib? Do I want to be tayyib? Do I have aspiration towards it? The same way you have aspiration towards, I really need to get that job. I really need to get that degree. I really need to get this ring on my finger. I really need to get these kids. Imam Nawawi, rahimahullah, he dies at a young age. One of the reasons why they say he dies at a young age is because he refused to eat many of the foods of his local community because he believed that government had unjustly usurped lands and was not willing to eat that food because he didn't consider it to be pure. These weren't people who just were throwing Hadith and Quran out. They lived with ethics and values. Do you see? So if he's going to put a Hadith in a book that all of us read, then you see like how Allah magnifies his status. Every Muslim reads these Hadith. Everybody knows Imam Nawawi's name. He wouldn't eat as best as he could food that came from questionable sources. It adds to like who he is as an entire person. In the coming weeks, we'll go through all those things. But step number one in a hadith like this has to be rooted in the idea of, do I want this for myself? Do I want to be the person who interjects goodness into the world and aspires towards goodness? Do I want to treat people based off of who I am and not who it is that they are. And the crazy thing about that type of perspective is it can go back to the self too. Because a lot of times we don't treat ourselves based off of who we actually are. We treat ourselves based off of what we perceive ourselves to be. And in a world that teaches us to overeat, a world that has more people dying from eating too much than eating too little, and tells us to numb pain and to become desensitized to confronting parts of ourselves, we don't necessarily treat ourselves as a whole person or wholesomely because we don't see ourselves based off of who we actually are. We see ourselves based off of these variables that influence our ethics and etiquettes to be other than some of these things. تَخَلَّقُوا بِأَخْلَاقِ اللَّهِ. You want to, as best as you can, embody the characteristics of the divine that you are able to. Once you want it, you then figure out, how do I learn those things? How do I start to learn like what these characteristics are? Where does somebody go to like learn about who Allah is? But let me take a step back before we do that, because I'm talking a lot. You can turn to the person next to you. How did you learn about who Allah is? Like, what played a role in you knowing who your God is? If I was to ask you, who is Allah to you? That might be a good starting point for you to work your way backwards as to what brought you to the understanding of the divine that you have. Does it make sense? So if you can turn to the persons next to you, like, how did you learn who God is? What contributed to your understanding of God? Directly and indirectly, explicitly and implicitly, right? Because a lot of who we are is through a socialization that comes from indirect variables influencing. Like a lot of us in this room, if I was to ask you, who is Allah to you, right? Whether you admit it or not, you are impacted by whiteness in a definitively Judeo-Christian society that does not have a grammatically masculine God the way our God, Laysa kamithlihi shay, there's not anything that's like a likeness to God. So we do not have a gendered God. But when you are surrounded by God the Father, God the Son, God the Spirit, the unconscious conceptualization and the paradox of decision making, that when you don't make a choice, you've essentially chosen. And a lot of us have not consciously chosen an understanding of who God is to us. We're influenced by these variables, and we believe God is an angry old man in the sky because we meet a lot of angry Muslims who tell us we're going to hell all the time, right? But why do we believe God is a man in the sky? Right? You have unconscious socialization from societal norms around you, rooted in elements of privilege that don't have a grammatically masculine God as the Arabic language functions, but a very defined male God, right? And it starts to now impact indirectly, at least if you're from this country or born in this country. But do you get the idea of what I'm saying? So what contributes to you? Because if you believe Allah is an angry old man in the sky looking for a reason to punish you, why would you then want to embody the characteristics of the divine? You'd be probably walking around eggshells or getting to a place where like you don't have that connection or see that as a source of influence in that way. You see what I mean? We want to break these obstacles down. Learning sometimes is about unlearning. The Prophet, at a later stage of his prophethood, is still teaching his companions about who Allah is. Inna Allah tayyib. He's saying this in a hadith narrated by Abu Huraira, who we know comes later on in the period of prophethood, not early on. He's not amongst the first people who convert. Abu Huraira comes much later, and they're still talking about who Allah is. You see what I mean? It's an ongoing process. When was the last time you thought about who God is to you? Or when was the last time you reflected on anything? Right? These are variables that influence these kinds of things. You can turn to the person next to you, like, where could one go to find out who God is? And where was it that, like, did you go to those places to learn about who Allah is? And if not, where did you learn about who Allah is? What taught you about God? We can talk about that for a bit, and then we'll come back and discuss. But go ahead. Okay, so what are some of the things we're talking about? Where would one go to learn about Allah, our creator, our God? Is that where you learned about God from? Right? And how do we make those things connected and not like far away? What did we discuss? Yeah.
I can talk. I tried to learn first by reading the Quran in English, but I couldn't really access its meaning. And I felt like to be able to understand Quranic verses, I needed the help of people like yourself and other scholars of Islam, people whose knowledge had accumulated over the years, who could then speak to people of different levels. I think that's what made understanding God accessible.
Great. Alhamdulillah. Other thoughts? Yeah.
I felt like I was always raised in like a Muslim household. I grew up in Indonesia, so like it was very common for me to always just naturally. But as I got older and like started to go away from family for college or like things like that, and once you start to feel like there's trouble in your life, like losing family members, it felt like my emotions took me to Allah more so than my physical, like going to the masjid or anything. It felt like I felt my trust became greater, knowing that I had no control in situations and things I couldn't do. So that's when I felt like how I gravitated more so ever since I left home.
Great. Do you see the connection between these two things? Right? A variable that comes into both is when there's a gap in some capacity, the gap is recognized through like conscious reflection. Do you know? It's not that you're not hardwired to understand the existence of a God, but now to get to a place where you start to nuance the recognition of who that divine entity is, there comes to a place where I first have to take a pause and say, like, where I'm at requires X, Y, or Z. And I have to exert some kind of effort in some capacity. It's not just going to come to me. Like, I'm going to get out of it what I put into it, just like any other relationship. Do you know? If I like sat here and I started just pointing at people randomly, and I was like, you should marry that person, you should marry that person. Most of you would be like, what are you smoking, Khalid? That is not going to be like anything that happens. Do you know what I mean? You would have to fundamentally, as much as some people would be happy if that's not happening, right? It's not going down. Do you know? Yeah. Oh my God. But you would not put yourself in that place. You would want to have some type of intimate awareness of like the person and compatibility and whatever else, right? At least somebody to vouch for them. Like I'm saying, like literally, we line up. It's like count off by fours, 10, whatever, right? And we're pairing people at random without any interactions. Makes no sense. How can you pray to a divine entity every single day, 5 times a day, that you don't ever think about who that is? Or haven't ever like gone a little bit deeper into it other than we're just supposed to? Why would you then not have limitations or not be in a place where you think about it in this way that like every single day I'm saying Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim? Like, what do these things mean? Like maybe I should have some rahmah once in a while. Do you know? And why wouldn't shaitan bring us to this place where it wasn't a part of that relationship? Everything within kind of shaitani tendency is rooted in this facet of skewing perception. When we hear Adamic narratives of creation, right? Adam is created, everyone is commanded by Allah to prostrate in the heavens, everything does except Iblis. I'm of fire, he is of earth. Why would I like do this. Where I'm from is better than where he's from. He's arrogant, he's racist, he's flawed in his logic, but he's also interjecting into existence like limited perspective. You understand? And if shaitan gets you to have limited perspective of your relationship with the divine, that you're just speaking words, but you never think about what they mean and how they influence. Everything in this relationship goes back to God. And if you've never sat down to figure out who God is to you, it can create now an ease of abandoning God and then getting to a place of saying, well, why did God leave me? When in reality, I was the one that took steps away. How do you even know you're walking away from something? You don't even know what it is. So how could you tell that you left it behind? Do you understand? So you engage the Quran. There are not just 99 names of God, right? We have hadith that tell us about 99 names of Allah, but we're taught that if all of the waters in the world and were ink and the trees were pens, they would be exhausted, and you still could not exhaust like the descriptions of the divine, right? Like knowing Allah's vastness is beyond capacity. You know what I'm saying? Just like there's not 5 feelings that you feel. If I asked you how you're feeling, I'm sad, I'm happy, I'm angry, I'm upset, right? And the 5th one I can't think of right now. There's not 4 feelings that you feel. Do you know what I mean? When you become limited by language, you start throwing out words, and then you convince yourself you are something. It works the same way with everything else. Do you know? You tell other people the 4 emotional words that come up constantly. Why are you so angry? Person's not angry. They're just sad. They're in a state of grief. They're in a state of anxiety, right? Contentment is different from joy, which is different from happiness, which is different from elation. If they all meant the same thing, it would be the same word. You don't know what you mean when you say God or Rabb. How could you know if you never went and knew what it was that you have capacity to know? There's a lot of books that are written on the divine names of Allah. Like, you want to read them. When you read them, you think deeply. Like, how do I experience this in the world? Rahman, right? If you get to it at a grammatical level, you can understand it from that context to nuance it more. So, for example, in Arabic, when you have this form, the fa'alan form, it denotes like a deep emphasis. So if you were exhausted, you're really tired. Right now, you had a long day at work. Some of you are fasting. We're sitting here on the ground for 2 hours. Do you know what I mean? You could be tired. You say, Ana ta'ban. I'm exhausted. I'm tired. So much that tiredness is me. If you were lazy, right? Like you don't ever help with anything. Someone in your house is so upset because you always make a mess. They'll say you're kaslan, right? You're so lazy. Laziness is you. I'm so hungry. I didn't eat anything. I would say I'm jaw'an, right? It follows this same form, the fa'lan form. You hear how Rahman, kaslan, ta'ban, jaw'an, they have the same sound. Does it make sense? Right? You can look at these words like that. Rahim, it denotes continuity. Do you know? It's like, it's just going forever. But you can also not get to a place where shaitan gets the best of you, and you tell yourself, like, if I don't know this language, I can't get to it. You think about, how do you experience the Rahman in the world? Has there ever been somebody who you've engaged that has treated you with compassion? Do you see and witness in front of you people, even if they're not manyfold, and the reflection helps? So 1, you learn the name. 2, how do you experience it in the world? And then 3, how do you actualize it? You, like, how do you actualize it? How do I actualize it? How do I actualize Rahma in the world? Me. And why it's relevant, because when we get into the latter parts of this hadith, La yaqbal illa tayyib, He does not accept except that which is pure. The acceptance is what? Like, is Allah accepting your degree? Is Allah accepting your job title? Is Allah accepting the color of the skin that you are so proud of, that you rejected someone whose skin color was darker than yours? No, the acceptance is of deeds, actions. That's what Allah is not accepting if they're not tayyib. And they're not accepted if, by extension, what you're bringing to them is not tayyib. The only thing you take from this world is the actions. You stand in front of Allah, the Hadith says, you don't even have clothes to wear, right? This is what the Hadith says. The Prophet says, men and women are going to be standing, no clothes on the Day of Judgment. Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha says, O Messenger of God, how would this be? Won't they look at one another? Ya Aisha, ashaddu min dhalik. It'll be more severe than that. Right? They go to Adam alayhi salam seeking intercession. Everybody's saying nafsi, nafsi. Adam says that I have to think for myself. Allah is more angry today than he's ever been, more angry today than he'll ever be. I got to think for myself. I can't do anything for you. Go to different prophets seeking intercession. Everybody's saying nafsi, nafsi. Because there's only one owner, one master, one possessor of the Day of Judgment. That's Allah. It's not you or I. We won't even have clothes to wear. None of the stuff goes with you. What goes with you is how you attained it and what you did with it. Choices, decisions, actions. The ones that are accepted, la yaqbal illa tayyib. The ones that are accepted are the ones that are tayyib. Right? May Allah accept all of our deeds. You have to want that for yourself. And the recognition here is then in this frame, how do I actualize these things? How are they present in my deeds? Rahmah, how is it there? So you learn the name, you see where you experience it in the world, and you do, man. You want to know what Rahmah is? We had a doctor standing here just some months ago who was showing us pictures as he was on the ground for 2 weeks in Gaza, helping kids in the midst of this atrocious genocide. May Allah end the occupation that's taking place there and make us a generation that witnesses a free Palestine. That's beauty that he does this, right? Rahmah is in his family, compelling him to go. His wife is sitting back here, and she's the one that's coordinating his speaking schedule and saying, you got to go do this stuff. So it's not that there isn't Rahmah. You got to not look with your eyes that are trained to be mindless at this point. Look from a vision of your heart. And then you actualize it. How in this day am I going to bring some Rahmah to someone else and to myself? And then step number 4, you want to deepen in the relationship. Write a dua that is rooted in calling upon Allah by that name. Ya Rahman. And then what would you ask the source of Rahmah for? Right? What would you ask him for? Ya Basir. He's the all-seeing. What would you ask him for by that name? And it'll deepen the opportunity for a connection that's not just rote. You want to memorize Surah Ikhlas and recite it in your prayers, right? It's what most of you are doing. Surah Kawthar and Surah Ikhlas. It's coming again and again and again in every prayer. What does it mean? When you call upon Allah as Al-Ahad, As-Samad, what does it mean? And some of these things, when you try to experience them in the world, you fundamentally can't. Ahad is different from Wahid. Ahad is like the only one that's like this. You can't pluralize Ahad. Ahad is not divisible. The way this table can get broken down into screws and pieces of plastic and wood. The iPad can get broken apart. This thing can get broke. You and I are made up of different things. We can be broke. We're divisible. Ahad is not divisible. You can't experience that out there other than when you're looking at certain things and the majesty and beauty of it, and then you influence it through this prism. How does this help me to realize, like, the one who is the maker of all of these things as al-ahad? Do you know? Your heart's broken into pieces. Al-ahad is not divisible. Bring my heart together, the one who cannot be broken apart. Do you understand? Make us like a cohesive community, connected as if we were one unit. Ya Ahad. My family is breaking. My marriage is breaking. My friendships are breaking. Do you see what I mean? I feel like I'm being torn apart inside. Bring me back together. Allah is Musawwir. He's the one that's fashioned all of us. If you ever looked at the beauty of the sunrise and just see its beauty and magnificence, and then think about how beautiful must be the one that made this, you can experience these things. And then if you have capacity to do, you interject beauty into the world also. And then you write out this dua to Al-Musawwir. It doesn't have to be like 5 pages long or 5 sentences long, but it's an extension of you, and you're building a relationship with the divine. So in the beginning part of this hadith, the Prophet ﷺ, he's showing us that he's still teaching his companions about who God is. And this religion does not get to where it can if you don't know who God is. Do you see? And you don't take time to reflect on who God is. We're going to go through the other parts of this hadith in the coming weeks. Next week, we're going to talk about this in terms of actions. This is the thing that we take from this world. I don't want you to be paranoid about it, but I want you to, in between this week and next week, if you can, start to just think about the actions you're putting into the world. And do they qualify by a standard of what this hadith is calling us to? Tayyib, right? Not like grandeur things. You don't have to go and fly to a third world country and build a school for kids, right? May Allah give us tawfiq to be a source of benefit for his creation. I'm just talking about basic stuff. Be mindful and just think about it at the end of the day. How much of the stuff that you're doing is rooted categorically in this? It could be said to be like a wholesome act versus like a non-wholesome act. You know what I mean? The foods that I'm eating, the stuff that I'm drinking, the stuff that I'm buying. Do you get what I'm saying? Right? And then just generically, like your actions, think about them. Because most of what we do is not going to be good or bad. It's just going to be a lot of like futile stuff, pointless stuff. It's not creating detriment or benefit. It's just like I'm passing time, you know? And sometimes you might say, well, isn't that a good thing? Like I'm not always on. No, with intentionality, you can rest. And if you're bringing intentional rest, that's different than just you sat down and didn't know what to do. And spontaneity is the only catalyst of behavior. And then you start looking at something, and 6 hours later, you're still scrolling someplace else. That wasn't done consciously. Think about these hadith together. The first one we looked at, innamal a'malu binniyat, like actions are by their intentions, informs this. See how they speak to one another. Do you see what I mean? But think about like actions, because that's what we're taking when we leave from this world. This existence is a world of actions. It's a world of decisions, exertion, choices, right? So you want to start to think about some of those things with that mindfulness. So let's take 2 minutes. We can turn to the persons next to us. What are we taking away from the conversation thus far? And then we'll take a pause and pray Maghrib right after that. But go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of power. Yeah. Exactly. Showering. That allows you to take your life more action. Yeah, like, yeah, I mean, it's yeah, so it's back.
Guys, can you grab the ditch? Okay, what are some of the things, maybe a couple of people, anything we're taking away from tonight's discussion? I feel like they turned the air conditioning off. Yeah. What are we taking away from tonight's discussion? Yeah.
Everything has a purpose. We need to be reminded of that, and we need to always be intentional about every single thing that we do.
Great. Anything else? What did you guys discuss? Yeah.
Trying to give rahmah to the people in our lives that we feel is hard to give rahmah to.
Yeah. Yeah.
You want to be deciding, like when you are trying to make action and trying to be a better person. At the end of the day, it's who you want to be that decides that, versus like your environment or any external factors.
Yeah, or ideally, right? Like if we nuance it, like we are a product of external factors and other things, but who I am today shouldn't be afraid to meet who I can become tomorrow, but I need to envision who that is. Do you see? Yeah. So we're going to take a pause here. A couple of other things really quickly. Tomorrow, Dr. Murmur will be doing his halakha. On Wednesday, we're continuing. I'm going to be doing the Sira halakha. You guys are more than welcome to come on Wednesdays also. Thursday, Sheikh Faz won't be doing his program. And Friday, we'll have lunch after Jummah. On Saturday, we're going to be doing our monthly converts brunch. So if you're a convert, you are looking into Islam, you're a family member of someone in one of those categories, we'd love to have you join. It's limited to those individuals. And I can give you more information on that if you don't have it already. But that'll be on Saturday, inshallah. And then we'll send out information, but we'll have iftar for the day of Ashura, the 10th of Muharram. So just look out for the information for that in terms of location and whatever else. And we'll need help, just volunteers like we did for the day of Arafah. So people are around, they can help with that as well, inshallah. Great. So people want to just get ready. We'll call the adhan, and we'll pray Maghrib in a few minutes, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum. Alright, do you have wudu? Yeah, call the adhan.
But I always tell it, it's actually good. I use it now just like, so, but it's good because I don't like, yeah, that's fair. That's a good thing. One thing that's helping you I think the money app is taking I think keeping it is a good thing too.
Is he sound?
أشهد أن لا